news comes first. This is ABC7 Extra.
Good evening, I'm Saul Sainz, and this is ABC7 Extra Sunday edition. We welcome you on this somber weekend, the remembrance as we look back on a tragedy that struck the very fiber of America. It was when a clearly sunny Tuesday morning on September 11, 2001, turned deadly dark and has remained the darkest moment in American history, a day millions vowed to remember to never forget. That was the day al-Qaeda terrorists carried out suicide attacks, hijacking 4 planes and using them as weapons to strike fear into the very soul and backbone of America. I was in Orlando, Florida at the time, a reporter watching the morning news when one plane struck one of the Twin Towers. Confused, I watched in awe as a plume of smoke rose from the side of one of the World Trade Center buildings. Then the unimaginable happened, live, on air. A second plane struck the other Twin Tower, igniting that tower as well. An entire nation was captivated watching a nightmare unfold, watching both towers crumble to the ground, filling the Manhattan sky with dark gray smoke. We later learned that that day, a third plane struck the Pentagon just outside of Washington. A fourth plane crashed into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. It was discovered that plane was bound for the White House and would have crashed into it had it not been for a group of brave souls who fought back terrorists on board with that memorable line that went down in history: "Let's roll." Close to 3,000 people died that September 11th at the hands of those attacks 20 years ago, sparking national and international outrage, plunging our nation into war on 2 fronts, Iraq and Afghanistan. And this weekend, an entire nation remembers to never forget what happened that day and the lives lost. Tonight, we'll talk to the men and women who witnessed what did happen 20 years ago, but were front and center when called to action. We began with former Commanding General of Fort Bliss, Dana Pittard. ABC7's Brianna Chavez spoke to Pittard about the lasting impacts of that fateful day and his thoughts on what has happened since.
That is exploding right now. You got people running up the street. I don't know what to tell you what's going on.
I thought about leaving the Army twice before that. But after that, it was like, oh no, this is what I've been trained to do my entire life. So the thoughts of leaving at that time ended right there with 9/11.
On September 11th, 2001, then Lieutenant Colonel promotable Dana Pittard was a student at Harvard, completing a year-long fellowship. Former classmate and now Chief of Staff of the Army, James McConville, grabbed Pittard on their way to class.
We ran real quick to what's a building called the Forum. And just as we walked in there and we started watching, the second plane hit the other tower. And so we looked at each other and we knew that we were going to war.
Pittard says he felt helpless knowing he couldn't step in right away. And it wasn't until 2004 where he took his brigade to Iraq.
We started taking casualties and we had soldiers die.
It was a pain that thousands of service members had to deal with.
For those of us in uniform, it completely transformed our lives and the lives of our families. We just didn't know at that time that we would be going back and forth for multiple deployments for decades.
And now, with the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan complete, for Pittard,
the fact that the Taliban have just taken over Afghanistan just doesn't feel right.
Despite differing opinions on how the withdrawal was conducted, Pittard will never forget those we've lost, but also that feeling of being unified.
We were united as a country. Now, that didn't last long, but it was a neat feeling at the time in some ways, and a tough price to pay for that.
Hopeful that on this 20th anniversary, we can be united again.
America needs to be that bright, shining light. There's so much we need to do in our own country now for hope for the future.
Brianna Chavez, ABC7.
Joining us now by phone from Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, is former Las Cruces Police Chief Patrick Gallagher. Mr. Gallagher was a captain with the New York Police Department the day, to borrow a line, that has gone down in infamy. Chief Gallagher, or Mr. Gallagher, as you prefer to be called, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us.
You're welcome.
Can you share your experiences on that fateful day, September 11th?
You said I was a captain with the New York City Police Department and was called to respond that day, along with the people I worked with. I was working in the Internal Affairs Bureau at that time and in an investigative capacity. And we got mobilized. That's the term the NYPD uses when they mobilize, when they call into service investigative personnel to help with serious situations.
Essentially, you had to jump into action. What did you see when you got to the World Trade Center?
On that day, time I got in, the first tower had already come down, and as we were going in, we saw the second tower come down. So we were supposed to be traveling through the tunnel, Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, into Manhattan, and going to Stuyvesant High School, which was a little bit north of the World Trade Center. But at that time, we couldn't get there because the trade centers had already fallen. And we went through the tunnel, the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, and as we were going in, we were told that the tunnel was full of dust and debris. They couldn't, basically, they couldn't vouch for the structural integrity of the tunnel because of the seismic effect of the towers falling. So we crossed ourselves, said a prayer, and drove through. And about halfway through, we were hit with blinding dust from the towers that had fallen.
We normally associate the men and women in blue as having nerves of steel. What was going through your mind at the time that you saw all this soot and ash all over the place and realized that the towers had come down?
Pretty much just disbelief that it had happened, but also focused on the mission at hand. As a captain, I had, a number of people I was responsible for, so I wanted to make sure we all got to where we had to go safely and accomplish the mission that we were assigned to do. And when we came out into Manhattan, it was something out of a science fiction movie.
Yeah.
It was just pitch dark, and the dust was still coming down, and papers from the World Trade Center were falling all over the place.
And the people that you had to interact with, what were they telling you? What were they saying?
Well, what we did was, as we respond to our mobilization point, and the information en route there was very limited, just that we need to go at that location, which was actually changed to the New York City Police Academy, and just to go up there and await further orders. And that's what we did. And that's because we were an investigative unit. We were assigned to, along with other investigative units, to various hospitals throughout the city to await all the injured people and to help to try to identify them and reunite them with their loved ones. Unfortunately, we spent about 12 to 15 hours there waiting for people. I was assigned to Harlem Hospital, and nobody arrived because nobody got out of the building.
On a personal note, Mr. Gallagher, what goes through your mind when you have to think back on that day and remember the events that were unfolding and how you had to jump into action? What goes through your mind when you have to look back?
Frankly, I don't have to look back, and I prefer not to because of what we experienced. Getting a few other requests for interviews to ask me what it was like down there when we responded, and I don't talk about that. I think it's disrespectful to talk about what I saw and smelled and those type of things. But it is this year it's particularly more painful. 20th anniversary, the fact that law enforcement has, the way people look at law enforcement has changed recently, and it's very upsetting. It's kind of reminiscent about right after 9/11.
Yeah.
Everybody loved law enforcement, and we could do no wrong. We were the heroes, and that changed again. And it happened again in COVID. And a couple of weeks after we were heroes, we were zeros again.
Wow, that's sad.
So I feel for the men and women who are still in law enforcement, and I ask everybody to say a prayer for them and recognize that, God forbid this happened again, those are the men and women who would respond regardless of what people think about them.
Yeah. How do you think that tragedy, September 11th, changed the person that you are today?
That just made me a little more cautious, but also much more appreciative to live every day to the fullest. I'm still losing friends and colleagues to this day from the after effects. And I kind of wonder every time I get a cough or something, could it be related to that? And I try not to think about that.
Right. Patrick Gallagher, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us. I know you don't like me referring to you as chief because you are no longer chief, but in our hearts, you're still the chief. Thank you so much for taking time to talk to us.
I appreciate it. You have a good one.
You too. You're watching ABC7 Extra Sunday Edition. When we come back, we'll talk to an El Pasoan who also watched the entire events of 9/11 unfold and the consequences that day had on the borderland. You're watching ABC7 Extra, where news comes first.
No matter what your business is, you want it to be profitable. As the expert on what your company needs to succeed, take marketing into your own hands and create your own success. Reach your business goals by taking advantage of ProLink, our premium business page option at Borderland Local Links. Only $99 for the entire year. Customers are looking for you. Make sure you connect with them through Borderland Local Links. Simplify your marketing plan with a premium business page at borderlandlocallinks.com.
While other dealers are clearing out their 2021s, Oscar Leaser's Hyundai of El Paso has 2022s in stock and ready to rock today. Like 2022 Elantras in stock, 2022 Konas in stock, 2022 Tucson, Santa Fe's, and Palisades in stock and ready to rock. All available with zero down. That's zero down on 2022 models. And interest rates as low as 0.9% APR for 60 months. 2022s are here at Oscar Leaser's Hyundai of El Paso.
Tasha, did you know Geico could save you hundreds on car insurance and a whole lot more? So what are you waiting for? Hip-hop group tag team to help you plan dessert?
French vanilla, rocky road, chocolate peanut butter cookie dough. Scoop that is, scoop that is, scoop that is, scoop that is, scoop shakalaka, 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 shaka, scoop shakalaka, shakalaka, shakalaka.
Geico. Switch today and see all the ways you could save.
Come to the Labor Day Doorbuster sale going on right now at the Furniture Outlet. Your choice of any Ashley bed for only $269. Your choice of any Ashley 7-piece dining set for only $669. And your choice of any Ashley sofa set for only $969. Our financing includes no interest for up to 60 months. Don't miss the Labor Day Doorbuster sale and the best deals in town at the Furniture Outlet, 11165 Rojas, and online at thefurnitureoutletep.com.
Welcome back to ABC7 Extra. Joining us is Tanny Berg. Mr. Berg is a businessman and founder of Epicenter El Paso. Mr. Berg witnessed how the September 11th attacks affected the borderland. Welcome to ABC7 Extra Sunday Edition, Mr. Berg.
Thank you, Saul.
Let's talk about your thoughts on what happened that day and the days that followed right here in the borderland.
Well, obviously, all of us were shocked. All of us have that image of those planes hitting the buildings and the buildings falling down. And we had just started International World Trade Center here in El Paso. Wow. So we felt even closer to the fact that it was the World Trade Center that was coming down. We were affiliated with that World Trade Center, and I was instrumental in getting that started. And so it was devastating. It was devastating for all of us on the border, and really all of us as Americans. In fact, all free people all over the world.
Yeah. Let's talk about the ports of entry as well as airports. They were shut down immediately, right?
They were. We had restricted travel back and forth. The bridges eventually reopened. The airports eventually reopened. But as you and I know, the bridges today are closed again. COVID as an ostensible excuse for closing the bridges. But really, we know that most Juarenses today are vaccinated for COVID, which is more than we can say for a lot of Americans. But nonetheless, the bridges remain closed. And the overall impact for all of us here on the border is profound. Not allowing free traffic back and forth across our border, which has existed really for 200, 300 years, has impeded substantially our ability to economically recover from COVID and from 9/11 and the after effects of 9/11. So yes, the bridges closed right away, and sadly, the bridges are closed today, maybe for a different reason, but they're still closed.
Let's talk about, take you back to September 11, 2001, when the bridges did close. What sort of economic impact did it have then?
Well, in the beginning, we were all really in a state of shock. I think whether we were in Mexico, whether we were in America, whether we were Mexican nationals or American nationals, it didn't really matter. So for a while, we understood. The bridges didn't stay closed for very long after 9/11. They closed, as I recall, for a couple of weeks, but they reopened, and we all knew that they were going to reopen. There's too much international commerce going back and forth across our bridges, and there was really no evidence whatsoever that anything that we experienced during 9/11 had anything to do with what was going on the border here. So we did expect for a little while that there were going to be some obstructions, and there was. But then after a while, we saw things recover, and then the bridges reopened again.
As you well know, and because I was feeling it the same, there's a bit of fear going through not just the nation, but obviously internationally. What were you and your colleagues talking about as you witnessed the September 11th attacks, and then obviously the domino effect that happened thereafter?
None of us as Americans, I don't think anybody in the free world expected that America would be attacked on its own soil. I think the only time, other than Pearl Harbor, which was in Hawaii, the only other time America had been attacked was with Pancho Villa in Columbus, when he came across and attacked the city of Columbus. So I think it was just we were so blindsided, and we thought we were so well protected. Intelligence was so strong, just as you heard. I think that we really did not have any inkling of the possibility that something so devastating could happen on American soil. So all of us here were apprehensive, but there was no evidence whatsoever that Mexico had anything to do with 9/11, or that there was a tremendous amount of infiltration through the Mexican border. In fact, the only infiltration we found was on the Canadian border, somewhere near, Washington. But there was nothing to infer that there was a possibility of infiltration along the Mexican border. So we braced ourselves while everything was happening. But then as more and more facts came out, as more and more intelligence came out, we saw that there really wasn't anything to fear coming north from Mexico.
What about the airport? That remained closed for a while, or at least flights were frozen. What about then?
For a short while. Again, the economic impact on shutting down all flights. I know that while 9/11 was taking place, George W. Bush was the president, and his plane, which was up in the air, was diverted, and he was very well protected in an airplane. I think that, precautionary measures were taken to make certain that no Americans were at risk. And so airports and land ports and even seaports, to some degree, we were being vigilant, and they were being monitored. But after a while, I think it became evident that we weren't at risk. Or at least it was a risk that we were willing to live with. And so little by little, these airports and the land ports and the seaports opened it back up again. And until COVID, that's how it stayed.
Tony, what do you believe we've learned since then?
Well, certainly we've learned how interdependent we are on this border, how much we miss our people coming north from Mexico, how much we miss going into Juarez and into Mexico. We've learned to live with restrictions. After 9/11, even when you went on an airplane, there were additional restrictions. You had to have TSA check your luggage. You had to be, you had to go through X-ray technology. There were things that changed in the way we lived. You couldn't rush to an airplane and get on at the last minute. You really had to go an hour in advance or 2 hours in advance. And the same thing happened kind of on our ports. On our land ports, all of a sudden we saw lines extend substantially as Customs and Border Protection were doing more vigilant searches to be sure that we were all safe as Americans, and we appreciate that. That's why we're here. They're the frontline people that make it safe for us to live in America. So we understand that. But we can't be mindful of the fact we can't forget to be mindful of the fact that we're also citizens who live together on a common border, in a bicultural, binational community, bilingual community, where we have families that live on both sides of the border. And so I think this extended border security that has now precluded our ability to come back and forth, I don't know what kind of after effect that's going to have. Even if we lift this inability of Mexican nationals to come visit El Paso, my question is, will they really come back? I mean, they'll come back maybe for a couple of days, a couple of weeks, but are we going to go back to the same patterns that we experienced for the last 300 years? I don't know. Okay. None of us know. So it's a perplexing issue, much more complex than it looks from the outside. But those of us who live on the inside, we're concerned. We have concerns.
All right. Tanny Bird, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us on this Sunday evening.
Thank you, Saul. Thanks for inviting me.
All right. You're watching ABC7 Extra. Still ahead, we'll talk to the president of UTEP, Heather Wilson. Ms. Wilson was in our nation's capital the day of the September 11 attacks. We'll be right back.
Why bother mastering something? Why test a hybrid engine for over 6 million miles? Why hand-tune an audio system? Why include the most advanced active safety system in its class, Standard? Because when you want to create an entirely new feeling, the difference between excellence and mastery is all the difference in the world. The Lexus ES. Every curve, every innovation, every feeling, a product of mastery. Experience amazing at your Lexus dealer.
There's a hot, spicy deal for every moment at McDonald's. Enjoy the flame-roasted Hatch Green Chili taste of the Hatch Green Chili Double Cheeseburger for only $2.50.
At our dealership, we've been in business for 1 billion years, and we're here for you.
Cut! Alex, that's not how we do it.
You're right. That's not who we are. At Bravo Cadillac, we're about the culture, fun, and the experience. Plus, you get 0 down, 0 payments for 90 days, and oil changes for life. And you don't have to call me or track me down. Just come on in. And the best news is that we do have cars. Who are we? Bravo!
A doctor pulled me to the hallway and put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Your son has cancer."
Dallas Cowboys radio announcer Babe Laufenberg.
It was brutal. The amazing thing was the attitude that he kept throughout.
UTEP has a unique honor for a life cut tragically short.
He loved it here. He loved the guys. He loved the coaching staff.
Watch Nate Ryan's special report, The Thelaufenberg Legacy, Monday at 10, only on ABC7.
Welcome back to ABC7 Extra. I also want to welcome UTEP President Dr. Heather Wilson. Dr. Wilson was in Washington, D.C. on September 11th. Dr. Wilson was instrumental in shaping our national security following the September 11th attacks, and she's now instrumental in shaping the minds of our youth, educating students with firsthand knowledge of that dark day in history. Dr. Wilson, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us on this Sunday evening.
My pleasure.
Let's talk about your duties. What were your duties at the time of at September 11th, at the time of the attacks?
I was serving in the United States Congress, so I was in Washington on Capitol Hill on that day.
Yeah. What do you remember from that day?
Well, I was meeting with my staff. I had a morning meeting with one of our fellows who was actually from Sandia National Laboratories when a young staff member walked in and said, "Congresswoman, you need to turn on the television." And the first plane had gone into the building, and then we saw the second one. So I was on Capitol Hill that day.
And then, of course, we know that the third building was not far from Washington, D.C. It hit the Pentagon. Your thoughts?
The Pentagon was hit, and that's the point at which we gathered the staff together and sent people home, and those who lived on the Virginia side of the river found somebody on the D.C. side to stay with. But I also, my husband was in the military at the time. He was still a reservist. He was actually flying he had a meeting at the Pentagon scheduled for the 12th of September. And so he was flying to Washington that day. So everybody was, of course, trying to get in touch with family, as all Americans were that day, to let them know that we were okay.
I recall that moment following the moments after the attacks, and I know that air travel was suspended. What happened to your husband's flight?
It was diverted to El Paso.
Wow, of all places.
I was able to get through. It was very difficult to get through from Washington. It's funny the things you remember about that day. Once I sent the staff away from the Capitol, I stayed behind and sent a note, an email, to our staff of course, we still didn't know what was going to happen next, but to our staff in Albuquerque, saying that we had accounted for everyone in Washington as of that time, that I was staying in the office, and that I had let everyone else go home. and asking them to confirm receipt, that confirm that you have received this message. And then I was able to get through to my husband, but of course we had a 7-year-old and 4-year-old at the time, and I was also, it was very important, you know, for me to know that someone had gotten through to them, because of course their mom was in Washington, their dad was flying on an airplane to the Pentagon, and as 7-year-old and 4-year-old, we were able to get through to their principal at the school and have her go to the classroom to tell my son, your mom called, and she wanted you to know that Daddy will be home tonight. And that was the message we wanted to get through. And the other one was to keep the televisions off so that neither of our children would have that, would see.
Right, which of course, and images that are now ingrained in our memory for those of us who did witness it. Let's talk about national security. What has happened since that time? Because I know you were there in Washington, you were there before, during, and after. What has happened in terms of national security since then?
Of course, I was on the Armed Services Committee at the time and then went back to the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence for several years in the aftermath of 9/11. And of course, initially it was the authorization to use force and to go in after Al-Qaeda and to rebuild our intelligence capability in particular that had been allowed to erode over time. So stewarding and the rebuilding of American intelligence, because that in a lot of ways, the Cold War, we knew where the enemy was. I was served in Europe during the Cold War in the Air Force, and there was no question about where the Soviets were. We knew exactly where they were. They had the same exercises, used the same radio frequencies. If they had ever attacked, they were the huge monster in the forest, and what we were dealing with Al-Qaeda was 1,000 snakes in the forest. If we could find them, we could kill them. The key was to find them, and that meant exquisite intelligence tied to precise military capabilities. And so we had to steward that capability.
Yeah. Now, as you well know, since you are the president of UTEP, a lot of our students weren't even born then.
Yeah.
What is it that you think students now need to know about what happened that day and need to obviously keep in their minds as we move forward?
Well, one of the things I think all of us remember is those who, when evil happens, who we are comes out in the response, in the goodness, in the people who saved others, and the people who volunteered to serve in the wake of the attack on the United States. And to be thankful for those people who did serve and to learn a lesson from it, that in any kind of crisis, as citizens, we have a responsibility to do what we can from where we are with what we've got. And I think perhaps the pandemic over the last year has taught this generation of young Americans about that kind of service and helping others in a time of crisis.
I appreciate you elaborating on the national security aspect of it, but what have we learned since? And do you think, based on what we know today, something like this can be avoided, an attack like the one we had September 11th on the United States soil?
Well, while we attacked and destroyed much of what Al-Qaeda had in its safe haven in Afghanistan, terrorism and violent extremism is not like a disease that you can cure. It's more like a chronic disease that we have to monitor and have the intelligence to be able to find out who's going to try to hurt us. And I'm a big believer that we're a lot better off playing away games because the home games cost too much. Yeah. So let's find out where they are, determine what they may want to do to hurt Americans, and stop them from doing that.
Do you think we have that intelligence today to try to avoid or try to prevent something like that from happening ever again?
We have much more exquisite intelligence capabilities than we had on 9/11 20 years ago. But it's a continued effort, and you have to get it right all the time, not just 99% of the time. So the military and the intelligence community is in the business of trying to manage risk and reduce the risk that anyone who would want to harm Americans would be successful.
In the 30 seconds that we have left, your thoughts on the fact that we have left Afghanistan?
That's a longer discussion than 30 seconds and probably best left for another day.
Okay. Thank you so much for taking time to talk to us. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
As I said at the beginning of this program, I was a young reporter, at least younger, the day of the September 11th attacks. In retrospect, there was one image that stood out to me to this very day. It still stands out. When the skies over Manhattan were filled with gray soot and ash, it fell to the ground, enveloping everyone below. For that one moment in time, we were all one color. There was no black, no white, no brown. Everyone was covered in gray, and beyond that, a nation was united. We were all one. I want to thank you for sharing your Sunday evening with us. On behalf of everyone here at ABC7, I'm Saul Saenz, and this has been ABC7 Extra, Sunday edition. Good night y buenas noches.